Hmm. Yes, it does seem that it's time once again for everyone to come into the Grand Library and sit at Gill-boy's feet and allow me to serenade you with my beautiful voice. For we will be reading a very, 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 very illustrious, iconic, famous, popular Lovecraft story that is one of my own personal favorites, called Pickman's Model. Now, if memory serves me correct, one of the characters in this story is in some form or fashion in Randolph Carter's inner circle. Excuse me. And if I'm not mistaken, it's Elliot, who the main character is reading or relating this tale to. And then, of course, Pickman does make an appearance in the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. So therefore, Randolph Carter does meet Pickman. So I felt that this would be a good story to kind of segue out of Randolph Carter's story for the time being. Because before we go into the next Randolph Carter story, which would be the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, which is essentially a novel or a novella, we desperately need to read things like The Nameless City, The Cats of Ulthar, The Quest of Ironon, and The Strange High House in the Mist. There's very much needed to be, and The Dreams in the Witch House. There's very much needed to be read other stories within the dream cycle before we go into the Dream Quest. Because when we go into the Dream Quest, there's gonna be characters from all these other stories that come into it to meet Randolph Carter that may just go over your head, or it'll be bizarre. It's kind of like how I haven't read the Dunwich Horror or Naharli Hotep yet to you, but we read Celephus, and both those characters are in that story, as well as the Night Gaunts. So unless you've read those things, you're not going to pick up on it, but alas, you have me here to guide you into this wonderful mythological world that Lovecraft has created. And once again, I apologize for the lack of tie, because honestly, my corporate goth outfit is very much missing the black tie. But that's neither here nor there. We are in for quite a bit of a long story, so I won't ramble on too much in the beginning. And afterwards, we will very much so discuss some of the lore about the ghouls and what's in store for the next video and the future of the channel, stuff of that nature. We will be reading from the Arkham House first edition printing of the Dunwich Horror and other tales. I know I may have shown this in one of the other videos, but in case you haven't seen that one, here it is. And then we got to look at Howard Phillips Lovecraft himself. There's that Mr. Gangster right there. Check out that jawline. None can withstand it. Watch out, Bruce Campbell, coming at you with the Deadites. But yeah, that's another first edition that has, honestly, a lot of really good heavy hitters. And cool thing about this book is that I got this from a library, actually, who sold it to me. And there's like their little stamp there. I bought it off their little eBay site there. And it's crazy because originally when this came out, this book was $6.50. And there's the 1963 printing there. I thought that's pretty cool. So if you are into book collecting like me, you can nerd out there on this book. So yeah, I have pretty much the 3 definitive pinnacle volumes of Lovecraft that have all the classics that you could possibly want. Like, this one's got the Call of Cthulhu, the Dunwich Horror, the Whisper in Darkness, the Shadow over Innsmouth, the Shadow out of Time, the Rats in the Walls, the Music of Eric Zahn, the Haunter in the Dark, Pickman's Model, In the Vaults, The Terrible Old Man, The Color Out of Space, and of course, The Outsider. So heavy hitter here, you know, not bad. That's about $7 well spent if you ask me. Maybe back in the day you could have used that additional 50 cents to maybe get some candy, so you could pop some candy and get you a little sugar while you know, get your world all spooked out. I will try, just because I really love this story. I will really try to differentiate the voices between the characters, as I have done in other videos, and so I hope I don't disappoint in that regard. Also, a cool thing, since we discussed Yog-Sothoth and the bubbles, I'm sure you can see the little orbs, the little bubbles. So there's Yog-Sothoth, you know, some Yog-Sothothery for the Cthulhu mythos. So yeah, I'll try to have this kind of interactive because, you know, in this story, it's basically a guy relating to his friend the truth about someone they know, otherwise known as Pickman, who's this artist. And there is some like interactive drinking. And so I will try to do that. Like I have a drinking glass here and some, you know, fun stuff there. And I'll try to role play as the character and, you know, offer you a drink as if you were Elliot. And I hope you enjoy it. You know, this is going to be one of the final videos that I upload until next week, and do that special feature for you all. So I hope you all have your own drinks and your own snacks, and get yourself comfy, because this is probably going to be a very long audio book, and I hope that you enjoy your time here. Now, before we begin, I know we're reaching to basically the 7-minute mark, but you know, this was written in September of 1926, and it was first published in October of 1927 in an issue of Weird Tales. It has been adapted for television anthology series twice, in 1971, an episode of Night Gallery starring Bradford Dillman, and in 2022 episode of Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities starring Crispin Glover and Ben Barnes. Now, Crispin Glover, who also played Willard and has that really creepy "It's Clowns" music video, plays Pickman. And honestly, I will have to say, and we'll talk more about that after we read it, I thought his performance was great. Was it a very good adaptation? As good as it can be for cinema. And you'll see as we read, like it would be hard to adapt this. You could very much adapt this as it is written, of course. But if you want to take some liberties and make it more cinema friendly and add some more outside mythos into it, that's more or less what the Del Toro show did. So, without wasting any more time, let us go ahead and delve into the deeper lore of Yog-Sothoth and the Cthulhu mythos. Pickman's Model by H.P. Lovecraft. You needn't think me crazy, Elliot. Plenty of others have queerer prejudice than this. Why don't you laugh at Oliver's grandfather who won't ride in a motor? If I don't like that damn subway, it's my own business, and we got here more quickly anyhow in the taxi. We'd have to walk up the hill from Park Street if we'd taken a car. I know I'm more nervous than I was when you saw me last year, but you don't need to hold a clinic over it. There's plenty of reason, God knows, and I fancy I'm lucky to be sane at all. Why, the 3rd degree? You didn't used to be so inquisitive. Well, you must hear it. I don't know why you shouldn't. Maybe you ought to. Anyhow, for you kept riding me like a grieved parent when you heard I began to cut the art club and keep away from Pickman. Now that he's disappeared, I go around to the club once in a while, but my nerves aren't what they were. No, I don't know what's become of Pickman, and I don't like to guess. You might have surmised I have some inside information when I dropped him, and that's why I don't want to think where he's gone. Let the police find what they can. It won't be much, judging from the fact that they don't know yet of the Old North Inn place he hired under the name of Peters. I'm not sure that I could find it again myself. Not that I'd ever try, even in broad daylight. Yes, I do know. Or I'm afraid I know. Yes, why he maintained it. I'm coming to that. And I think you'll understand before I'm through why I didn't tell the police. They would ask me to guide them, but I couldn't go back there even if I knew the way. There was something there, and now I can't use the subway, and you may as well have your laugh at this too. Go down into cellars anymore? I should think you've known I didn't drop Pickman for the same silly reason that fussy old woman like Dr. Reed or Joe Mignot or Rosworth did. Morbid art doesn't shock me, and when a man has the genius Pickman had, I felt it an honor to know him, no matter what direction his works took. Boston never had a greater painter than Richard Upman Pickman. I said it first, and I say it still, and I never swerved an inch either when he showed me that ghoul feeding. That, you remember, was when Minton cut him. You know, it takes profound art and profound insight into nature to turn out stuff like Pickman's. Any magazine cover hack can slash paint around wildly and call it a nightmare or a witch's Sabbath or a portrait of the devil. But only a greater painter can make such a thing really scare or ring true. That's because only a real artist knows the actual anatomy of the terrible or the physiology of fear. The exact sort of lines and proportions that connect up with latent instincts or hereditary memories of fright, and the proper color contrasts and lightning effects to stir the dormant sense of strangeness. I don't have to tell you why a Fusilieri really brings a shiver while a cheap ghost story frontispiece merely makes us laugh. There's something those fellows catch beyond life that they're able to make us catch for a second. Dorr had it, Sim had it, and Angrolia of Chicago has it. And Pickman had it as no man ever had it before, or I hope to heaven ever will again. Don't ask me what it is they see. You know, in ordinary art, there's all the differences in the world between the vital, breathing things drawn from nature or models in the artificial truck that commercial small fry reel off in a bare studio by rule. Well, I should say that the really weird artist has a kind of vision which makes models or summons up what amounts to actual scenes from the spectral world he lives in. Anyhow, he manages to turn out results that differ from the pretender's mince pie dreams in just about the same way that the life painter's results differ from the concoctions of a correspondence school cartoonist. If I had ever seen what Pickman saw, but no. Here, let's have a drink before we go any deeper. Just 1 second. Here you are. Here, take it. Yes, thank you. Drink, Elliot. Yes. Cheers. Yeah. God, I wouldn't be alive if I'd ever seen what that man, if he was a man, saw. You recall that Pickman's forte was faces. I didn't believe anybody since Goya could put so much of a sheer hell into a set of features or twist of an expression. And before Goya, you have to go back to the medieval chaps who did the gargoyles and chimeras on Notre Dame and Mont Saint Michael. They believed all sorts of things and maybe saw all sorts of things too, for the Middle Ages had some curious faces. I remember you were asking Pickman yourself once, you know, the year before you went away. Wherever in thunder he got such ideas and visions. Wasn't that a nasty laugh he gave you? It was partially because of that laugh that Reed dropped him. You know, Reed, Reed, you know, he had just taken up comparative pathology and was full of pompous inside stuff about the biological or evolutionary significance of this or that mental or physical symptom. He said Pickman repelled him more and more every day and almost frightened him towards the last. But the fellow's features and expressions were slowly developing in a way he didn't like, and a way that wasn't human. He had a lot of talk about diet and said Pickman must be abnormal and eccentric to the last degree. I suppose you told Reed he had any correspondence over it, that he'd let Pickman's paintings get on his nerves or hollow up his imagination. I know I told him that myself then. But keep in mind that I didn't drop Pickman for anything like this. On the contrary, my admiration for him kept growing, for that ghoul feeding was a tremendous achievement, and as you know, the club wouldn't exhibit it, and the Museum of Fine Arts wouldn't accept it as a gift, and I could add that nobody would buy it, so Pickman had it right in his house till he went. Now his father has it in Salem. You know, Pickman comes from old Salem stock, and had a witch ancestor hang in 1692. Did you know that? No, Elliot? Well, I got into the habit of calling on Pickman quite often, especially after I began making notes for a monograph on weird art. Probably it was his work which put the idea into my head, and anyhow I found him a mine of data and suggestion when I came to develop it. He showed me all the paintings and drawings he had about, including some pen and ink sketches that would, I verily believe, have got him kicked out of the club if many of the members had seen them. Before long I was pretty nearly a devotee, and would listen for hours like a schoolboy to art theories and philosophical speculations, wild enough to qualify him for the Danvers Asylum. My hero worship, coupled with the fact that that people generally were commencing to have less and less to do with him, made him get very confidential with me. And one evening he hinted that if I were fairly close-mouthed and none too squeamish, he might show me something rather unusual, something a bit stronger than anything he had in his house. "You know," he said, "there are things that won't do for Newberry Street. Things that are out of place here, and that can't be conceived here, anyhow. It's my business to catch the overtones of the soul, and you won't find those in the parvenu set of artificial streets on made land. Back Bay isn't Boston. It isn't anything yet, because it's had no time to pick up memories and attract local spirits. If there are any ghosts here, they are the tame ghosts of a salt marsh and a shallow cove. And I want human ghosts. The ghost of beings highly organized enough to have looked on hell and known the meaning of what they saw. The place for an artist to live is the North End. If any aesthetic was sincere, he'd put up what the sums for the sake of the mass traditions. God, man! Don't you realize that places like that weren't merely made, but actually grew? Generation after generation lived and felt and died there, and in days when people weren't afraid to live and feel and die. Don't you know there was a mill on Copp's Hill in 1632, and that half the present streets were laid out by 1650? I can show you houses that have stood 2 centuries and a half and more. Houses that have witnessed what would make a modern house crumble into powder. What do moderns know of life and the forces behind it? You call the Salem witchcraft a delusion? I'll wager my 4 times great-grandmother could have told you things. They hanged her on Gallows Hill, with Cotton Mather looking sanctimoniously on. Mather, damn him, was afraid somebody might succeed in kicking free of this accursed cage of Montanomy. I wish someone had laid a spell on him or sucked his blood in the night. I can show you a house he lived in, and I can show you another one he was afraid to enter in spite of all his fine, bold talk. He knew things he didn't dare put into that stupid magnolia, or that puerile wonder of the invisible world. Look here, you do know the whole North End once had a set of tunnels that kept certain people in touch with these other houses, and the burying ground and the sea. Let them prosecute and persecute above ground. Things went on every day that they couldn't reach,
and voices laughed at night and they couldn't play. Right, man, out of 10 surviving houses built before 1700 and not moved since I'll wager that in 8 I can show you something queer in the cellar. There's hardly a month that you don't read of workmen finding bricked up arches and wells leading nowhere in this or that old place as it comes down. You see one near Hinchman Street from the elevated last year. There were witches, and what their spells summoned, pirates, and what they brought in from the sea, smugglers, privateers, and I tell you, people knew how to live and how to enlarge the bounds of life in the old time. That wasn't the only world of old white man enough. And the link of the day in contrast with such pale pink brains that even a club of supposed artists gets shudders and convulsions if a picture goes beyond the feelings of a Beacon Street tea table. The only saving grace of the present is that it's too damn stupid to question the past very closely. What do maps and records and guidebooks really tell of the Northland? I guess I'll guarantee to lead you to 30 or 40 alleys and networks of alleys north of French Street that aren't suspected by 10 living beings outside of the foreigners that swarm them. And what do those Diegos know they're meeting? No, Turber. These ancient places are dreaming gorgeously and overflowing with the wonder and terror and escape from the commonplace. And yet there's not a living soul to understand or profit by them. Or rather, there's only one living soul. But I haven't been digging around in the past for nothing. See here? You're interested in this sort of thing, I know. What if I told you that I got another studio up there where I could catch the night spirit of antique horror and paint things that I couldn't even think of in Newberry Street? Naturally, I don't tell those cursed old maids at the club would read, damn him, whispering even as it is that I'm so sort of monster bound down on the toboggan of reverse evolution. Yes, sir, I decided long ago that one must paint terror as well as beauty from life. So I did some exploring of places where I had reason to know terror lives. I got a place that I don't believe 3 living Nordic men besides myself have ever seen. It isn't so very far from the elevator. The distance goes the centuries away as the soul goes. I took it because of the queer old brick well in the cellar, one of the sort I told you about. Well, the sack's almost tumbling down so that nobody else would live there, and I'd hate to tell you how little I pay for it. The windows are boarded up, but I like that all the better since I don't want daylight for what I do. I painted the cellar where the inspiration is thickest, but the room's furnished on the ground floor. A Sicilian owns it, and I've hired it under the name of Peters. Now, your game, I'll take you there tonight. I think you'd enjoy the pictures, for as I said, I've let myself go a bit there. It's no vast tour. I sometimes do it on foot, for I don't want to attract attention with the taxi in such a place. We could take the shuttle at the south station of Battery Street, and after that the walk isn't much. Well, Elliot, there wasn't much for me to do after that haranguing, but to keep myself from running instead of walking for the first vacant cab we could sight. We changed to the elevated at the south station, and at about 12 o'clock had climbed down the steps at a Battery Street and struck along the old waterfront pass, Constitution Wharf. I didn't keep track of the cross street and can't tell you yet which it was we turned up, but I know it wasn't Green Novay. When we did turn, it was to climb through the deserted length of the oldest and dirtiest alley I ever saw in my life, with crumbling-looking gables, broken
small pane windows and archaic chimneys that stood out half disintegrated against the moonlit sky. I don't believe there were 3 houses in sight that hadn't been standing in Cotton Mather's time. Certainly I glimpsed at least 2 with an overhang, and once I thought I saw a peaked roof line of an almost forgotten preamble type. Though antiquarians tell us there are none left in Boston. From that alley, which had a dim light, we turned to the left into an equally silent and still narrow alley, with no light at all, and in a minute made what I thought was an obtuse angle bend toward the right in the dark. Not long after this, Pickman produced a flashlight and revealed an antediluvian tin-paneled door that looked damnably worm-eaten. Unlocking it, he ushered me into a barren hallway with what was once splendid dark oak paneling, simple, of course, but thrillingly suggestive of the times of Andros and Pips and of the witchcraft. And he took me through a door on the left, lighted an oil lamp, and told me to make myself at home. Now, Elliot, I'm what the man in the street would call fairly hard-boiled, but I'll confess that what I saw on the walls of that room gave me a bad turn. They were his pictures, you know, the ones he couldn't paint or even show in Newbury Street. And he was right when he said he had let himself go. Hang on. I'm sorry, Elliot. It's getting warm in here. Here, let me see. Thank you, yes. Here, let's have another drink, Elliot. Here. Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you. That's good. Yeah. Have another drink. I need one anyhow. There's no use me trying to tell you what they were like, because the awful blasphemous horror and the unbelievable lonesomeness and moral failure came from simple touches quite beyond the power of words to classify. There was none of the exotic technique you see in Sydney Syme, none of the trans-Centurion landscapes and longer fungi that Clark Ashton Smith uses to freeze the blood. It's not like that, huh? The backgrounds were mostly old churchyards, deep woods, cliffs by the sea, brick tunnels, ancient paneled rooms, or simple vaults of masonry. Copp's Hill burying ground, which could not be many blocks away from this very house, was a favorite scene. The madness and monstrosity lay in the figures in the foreground, for Pickman's morbid art was preeminently one of demonic portraiture. These figures were seldom completely human, but often approached humanity in varying degree. Most of the bodies, while roughly bipedal, had a forward slumping and a vaguely canine cast. The texture of the majority was a kind of unpleasant rubberness. Ugh. I could see them now. Their occupations, well, don't ask me to be too precise. They were usually feeding. I won't say on what. They were sometimes showed in groups in cemeteries or underground passages, and often appeared to be in battle over their prey, or rather their treasure trove. And what damnable expressive Pickman sometimes gave the sightless faces of this charnel booty. Occasionally the things were shown leaping through open windows at night, or squatting on the chest of sleepers, worrying at their throats. One canvas showed a ring of them baying about a hanged witch on Gallows Hill, whose dead face held a close kinship to theirs. But don't get the idea that it was all this hideous business of theme and setting which struck me faint. I'm not a 3-year-old kid, and I've seen much like this before. It was the faces, Elliot. Those accursed faces that leered and slavered out of the canvases with the very breath of life. By God, man, I verily believe they were alive. A nauseous wizard had waked the fires of hell, and Pickman and his brush had been a nightmare spawning wand. Give me that decanter, Elliot. There was one thing called the lesson. Heavy pity me that I ever saw it. Listen, you can fancy a squatting circle of nameless dog-like things in a churchyard teaching a small child how to feed like themselves. The price of a changeling. I suppose you know the old myth about how the weird people leave their spawn in cradles in exchange for the human babies they steal? Yes, Pickman was showing what happens to those stolen babies, how they grow up, and then I began to see a hideous relationship in the faces of the human and non-human figures. He was in all his gradations of morbidity between the frankly non-human and the degradably human, establishing a sardonic linkage in evolution. The dog things were developed from mortals. And no sooner had I wondered what he had made of their own young as left with mankind in the form of changelings that my eye caught a picture embodying that very thought. It was that of an ancient Puritan interior. A heavily beamed room with lattice windows, a settle of clumsy 17th century furniture, with a family sitting about while the father read from the scriptures. Every face but one showed nobility and reverence, but that one reflected the mockery of the pit. It was that of a young man in years, and no doubt belonged to a supposed son of that pious father, but in essence it was the kin of the unclean things. It was their changeling, and in a spirit of supreme irony, Pickman had given the features a very perceptible resemblance to his own. By this time Pickman had lighted a lamp in an adjoining room and was politely holding open the door for me, asking me if I would care to see his modern studies. I hadn't been able to give him much of my opinions. I was too speechless with fright and loathing, but I think he fully understood and felt highly complimented. And now I want to assure you again, Elliot, that I'm no mollycoddle to scream at anything which shows a bit of departure from the unusual. I'm middle-aged and decently sophisticated, and guess you saw enough of me in that France to know that I am not easily knocked out. Remember, too, that I just about recovered my wind and gotten used to those frightful pictures which turned colonial New England into a kind of annex of hell. Well, in spite of this, the next room forced a real scream out of me, and I had to clutch at the doorway to keep from keeling over. The other chamber had shown a pack of ghouls and witches overrunning the world of our forefathers, but this one brought the horror right into our own daily life. God, how that man could paint! There was a study called Subway Accident, in which a flock of the vile things were clambering up from some unknown catacombs through a crack in the floor of the Boston Street subway and attacking a crowd of people on the platform. Another showed a dance on Copp's Hill among the tombs with the background of today. Then there were a number of cellar views, with monsters creeping in through holes and rifts in the masonry and grinning as they squatted behind barrels or furnaces and waited for their first victim to descend the stairs. One disgusting canvas seemed to depict a vast cross-section of Beacon Hill, and ant-like armies of the mephitic monsters squeezing themselves through burrows that honeycombed the ground. Dances in the modern cemeteries were freely pictured, and another conception somehow shocked me more than all the rest. A scene in an unknown vault where scores of the beasts crowded about one who held a well-known Boston guidebook and was evidently reading aloud. All were pointing to a certain passage, and every face seemed so distorted with the epileptic and reverberant laughter that I almost thought I heard the fiendish echoes. The title of the picture was Holmes, Lowell, and Longfellow Lie Buried in Mount Auburn. As I gradually steadied myself and got readjusted to this second room of deviltry and morbidity, I began to analyze some of the points of my sickening loathing. In the first place, I said to myself, these things repelled because of the utter inhumanity and callousness cruelty they showed in Pickman. The fellow must be a relentless enemy of all mankind to take such glee in the torture of brain and flesh and the degradation of the mortal tenement. In the second place, they terrified because of their very greatness. Their art was the art that convinced when we saw the pictures we saw the demons themselves and were afraid of them. And the queer part was that Pickman got none of his power from the use of selectiveness or bizarre. Nothing was blurred, distorted, or conventionalized. Outlines were sharp and lifelike, and details were almost painfully defined, and the faces was not any mere artist's interpretation that we saw. It was pandemonia itself, crystal clear in stark objectivity. That was it, by heaven. And the man was not a fantasy or a romanticist at all. He did not even try to give us the churning prismatic inferior of dreams, but coldly and sardonically reflected some stable, mechanistic, and well-established horror world, which he saw fully, brilliantly, squarely, and unfalteringly. God knows what that world can have been. or where he ever glimpsed the blasphemous shapes that looped and trotted and crawled through it. But whatever the baffling sources of his images, one thing was plain. Pickman was in every sense a conception, and in execution a thorough, painstaking, and almost scientific realist. My host was now leading the way down cellar to his actual studio, and I braced myself for some hellish effects among the unfinished canvases. As we reached the bottom of the damp stairs, he turned his flashlight to a corner of the large open space at hand, revealing the circular brick curb of what was evidently a great well on the earthen floor. We walked nearer, and I saw that it must be 5 feet across, with walls a good foot thick and some 6 inches above the ground level. Solid work of the 17th century, or I was much mistaken. That Pickman said was the kind of thing he had been talking about, an aperture of the network of tunnels that used to undermine the hill. I noticed idly that it did not seem to be bricked up, and that a very heavy disc of wood formed the apparent cover. Thinking of the things this must have been connected with if Pickman's wild hints had not been mere rhetoric. I shivered slightly, then turned to follow up a step, and through a narrow door into a room of fair size, provided with a wooden floor and furnished as a studio. An acetylene gas outfit gave the light necessary for work. The unfinished pictures on easels, or propped against the walls, were as ghastly as the finished ones upstairs, and showed the painstaking method of the artist. Scenes were blocked out with extreme care, and penciled guidelines told of the minute exactitude which Pickman used in getting the right perspective and proportions. The man was great. I say it even now, knowing as much as I do. A large camera on a table excited my notice, and Pickman told me that he used it in taking scenes for backgrounds, so that he might paint them from photographs in the studio instead of catering his outfits around the town for this or for that view. He thought a photograph quite as good as an actual scene or model for sustained work, and declared he employed them regularly. There was something very disturbing about the Nasa sketches and half-finished monstrosities that leered around from every side of the room, and when Pickman suddenly unveiled a huge canvas on the side away from the light, I could not for my life keep back a loud scream. The second I had admitted that night, it echoed and echoed through the dim vaultings of the ancient and nitrous cellar, and I had to choke back a flood of reaction that threatened to burst out of hysterical laughter. Merciful Creator, Elliot, but I don't know how much was real and how much was feverish fancy. It doesn't seem to me that Earth can hold a dream like that. It was a colossal and nameless blasphemy with glaring red eyes, and it held in bony claws a thing that had been a man gnawing at the head as a child nibbles at a stick of candy. Its position was a kind of crouch, and as one looked, one felt that at any moment it might drop its present prey and seek a juicier morsel. But damn it all, it wasn't even the fiendish subject that made it such an immortal fountainhead of all panic, not that, nor the dog face with its pointed ears, bloodshot eyes, flat nose, and drooling lips. It wasn't the scaly claws, nor the mold-caked body, nor the half-toed feet. None of these, though any one of them might well have driven an excitable man to madness. It was the technique, Elliot. The cursed, the impious, the unnatural technique. Am I a living being? I never elsewhere saw the actual breath of life so fused into a canvas. The monster was there. It glared and gnawed and gnawed and glared, and I knew that only a suspension of nature's laws could ever let a man paint a thing like that without a model, without some glimpse of the netherworld which no mortal unsold to the fiend has ever had. Pinned with a thumbtack to a vacant part of the canvas was a piece of paper, now badly curled up. Probably, I thought, a photograph from which Pickman meant to paint a background as hideous as the nightmare it was to enhance. I reached out to uncurl it and to look at it, when suddenly I saw Pickman start as if shot. He had been listening with peculiar intensity ever since my shocked scream had waked unaccustomed echoes in the dark cellar, and now he seemed struck with a fright which thought not comparable to my own, had in it more the physical than of the spiritual. He drew a revolver and motioned me to silence, then stepped out into the main cellar and closed the door behind him. I think I was paralyzed for an instant. Imitating Pickman's listening, I fancied I heard a faint scurrying sound somewhere, and a series of squeals or beasts, or in a direction I couldn't determine. I thought of huge rats and shuddered. Then there came a subdued sort of clatter which somehow set me all in gooseflesh, a furtive, groping kind of clatter. though I can't attempt to convey what I mean in words. It was like heavy wood falling on stone or brick, wood on brick. What did that make me think of? It came again and louder. There was a vibration as if the wood had fallen farther than it had fallen before. After that followed a sharp grating noise, a shouted gibberish from Pickman, and the deafening discharge of all 6 chambers of a revolver, fired spectacularly as a lion tamer might fire in the air for effect. A muffled squeal or squawk and a thud. Then more wood and brick grating, a pause, and the opening of the door, at which I'll confess I started violently. Pickman reappeared with his smoking weapon, cursing the bloated rats that infested the ancient well.
The youth knows what they eat, Thurber, he grinned. For those archaic tunnels touch graveyard in Wiston and sea coast. But whatever it is, they must have run short, for there were devilish anxious to get out. Your yelling stirred them up, I fancy. We better be cautious in these low places. Our rodent brains are the one drawback. Though I sometimes think they're positive asset by way of atmosphere and color.
Well, Elliot, that was the end of the night's adventure. Pickman had promised to show me the place, and heaven knows he had done it. He led me out of that tangle of alleys in another direction, it seems, for when we sighted a lamppost, we were in half-familiar street with monotonous rows of mingled tenement blocks and old houses. Charter Street it turned out to be, but I was too flustered to notice just where we hit it. We were too late for the elevator and walked back downtown through Hanover Street. I remember that walk. We switched from Tremont up Beacon, and Pickman left me at the corner of Joy, where I turned off. I never spoke to him again. Why did I drop him? Don't be impatient. Wait till I ring for coffee. We've had enough of the other stuff, but I for one need something. No, it wasn't the paintings. I saw that in that place, though. I'll swear they were enough to get him ostracized in 9/10 of the homes and the clubs of Boston. And I guess you won't wonder now why I have to steer clear of subways and cellars. There was something I found in my coat the next morning. You know, the curled up paper tacked up to that frightful canvas in the cellar. The thing I thought was a photograph of some scene he meant to use as a background for that monster. Well, that last scare had come while I was reaching to uncurl it, and it seems I had vacantly crumpled it into my pocket. But here's the coffee. Take it, Black. Elliot, if you're wise. Yes, that paper was the reason I dropped Pickman. Richmond Upton Pickman, the greatest artist I have ever known, and the foulest being that ever leaped the bounds of life into the pits of myth and madness. Elliot, old Reed was right. He wasn't strictly human. Either he was born in strange shadow, or he found a way to unlock the forbidden gate. It's all the same now, for he's gone, back into that fabulous darkness he loved to haunt. Here, let's have the chandelier going. Don't ask me to explain or even conjecture about what I burned. Don't ask me either what lay behind that mole-like scrambling. Pickman was so keen to pass off as rats. There are secrets, you know, which might have come down from old Salem times, and Count Mather tells even stranger things. You know how damn lifelike Pickman's paintings were? How we all wondered where he got those faces. Well, that paper wasn't a photograph of any background after all. What it showed was simply the monstrous being he was painting on that awful canvas. It was the model he was using, and his background was merely the wall of the cellar studio in minute detail. But by God, Elliot, it was a photograph from life. I think we all know pretentious art students. I was once a pretentious art student myself, and I know a fellow art student who was not pretentious. This is one of his favorite stories, and I feel like it's kind of Lovecraft trolling artists, because you can take yourself too seriously in your paintings or in your sketches or in your writings or whatever art craft you do. You can take yourself so seriously that you become a monster. And so I've always thought that this was kind of had kind of a double meaning to it. Like, Pickman is that overly pretentious artist that's so, he's so artistic that the artists that try to define and tell you what art is reject him, because he's the ultimate edgelord. And I've always loved it. Like, I actually read this story when I was in art school and taking painting classes and other kinds of art classes, and I have nothing but good things to say about my professors and my fellow students. But in saying that, there's definitely were some pretentious people in the classes and stuff, and we all kind of fall into that ourselves at times. I know I have. But one thing that's cool about this story, as pertaining to like the lore, is that you'll notice how they were our main bro here, Thurber, who's definitely like freaking out and probably needs to drink a lot more coffee and whiskey. But he mentions how he sees the ghouls being able to come from some kind of other world into our world, and that there's certain gateways, like in cemeteries and in subways and bridges in abandoned places. So what's cool is, I'll just go ahead and tell you, when you start reading the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadaf, there are ways where you can physically, in the waking world, go into the dream world physically. And that's what that is, and that's like the deeper lore within Pickman's model. So in a way, Pickman's model is straight Yog-Sothory, Cthulhu mythos with the ghouls and all that nightmare fuel, but it is also still associated with the dream cycle, though it is not, I would ever consider it a dream cycle tell. But in order to fully appreciate the dream cycle, like I've said in other stories, you have to know certain other stories, because it builds upon the world. It helps you understand and see the greater reality that Lovecraft is creating, because he's really a genius. He really thought this out, and I know a lot of people try to argue that on like certain Lovecraft subreddits and on the internet, because everybody agrees online about everything. There's no trolling or screaming at all or anything like that. But yeah, you can tell if you just read everything he's ever written and really analyze his work, that there is a thought out world. There is a very thought out, defined cosmology, although it may be alluded to and hinted at and very ambiguous. And it's only once you start reading all the stories and start piecing together the full pictures, you start seeing the greater horror that it is. And honestly, after I read all of his works, it blew my mind, because I didn't realize that this universe was as deep as it was. And so that's just kind of cool lore bits. And also the ghouls do return in other stories, and they in this story are definitely scary. They're eating people, they're killing people, they're kidnapping babies and raising the babies to be cannibals, and somehow are able to kind of mutate them per se into ghouls and that kind of stuff. So yeah, they're definitely a scary creature. But in later stories, they actually, I don't want to say they become more comical, but they become more associated with the forces of good. Although that's bizarre to say in Lovecraft's universe, because there's not really a concept of good or evil. But since morality is inherent within nature, I would say that the ghouls are kind of maybe neutral evil character, to use D&D and Pathfinder, and that kind of lingo or kind of scaling. And it's also depending on the ghoul. And Pickman does make a return in the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadaf, which is cool. So that's kind of a good segue out of the kind of dream cycle stuff we were really getting into. Now the next video that I will upload will be The Hound, and that's a very, very awesome story. That's another heavy hitter, as is Pickman's model. So I'm really giving you a back-to-back heavy hitter Lovecraft stories here. So I really hope that you enjoy them. I'm going to record a few more videos, and then, like I said, after I upload this one, I may wait a week and then upload The Hound, or I may upload The Hound shortly after this one and then upload that triple feature presentation. But I just really wanted to get caught up and re-record some stuff. This is the second time I had to re-record Pickman's model. I wasn't happy with the first version I did, with some of the voice acting that I did in it, and so I feel like this one's better so far. And I hope you enjoyed it. I try to be creepy. I try to give different characters and different voices, and I hope that you enjoy that. If you don't, let me know in the comments, and I will just continue to read it as normal me, or that Vincent Price voice that many of you have said that I have in chat. Which is weird because I've never thought that, but you know, I enjoy Lovecraft. I enjoy reading. I enjoy reading to people. I used to read to my mom quite often, and I used to work at a library and would read to kids there. And I've done, you know, a couple of Bible study stuff in the past, and read you know, Old Testament, New Testament stuff. There's a lot of big words in those books, man. A lot of big words in Lovecraft too, man. It's kind of hard to read. And but it's been a wonderful day, just spending it all day reading Lovecraft, and I hope that all of you have enjoyed hanging out with me all day, or in the coming days, or whenever you watch these videos. Like I said, I'm going to record a few more, and then hope to see you guys every once in a week until we work our way to, you know, the epitomes like Call of Cthulhu, and the Shadow over Innsmouth, and the Haunter of the Dark. Until then, stay salty, stay spooky, and Cthulhu Fatagan.